What if the most dangerous force humanity has ever faced wasn't the devil we've been taught to fear, but a fallen angel hidden in plain sight, a spirit whose power thrives not in destruction alone, but in rebellion against every law? Belial, the demon of lawlessness, has haunted sacred texts, apocrypha, and forbidden scrolls for centuries, yet most people have no idea who he truly is. And here lies the paradox. He is worthlessness personified, but his influence still shapes the world we live in today. This video, Belial, the demon of lawlessness, explained in obsessive detail, will take you deeper than surface myths. You'll see why Belial demonology terrified the ancients, why elites worshipped his corruption power in hidden cults, and how Belial influence today silently corrodes our systems, our morals, and even our personal lives. By the end, you won't just know who Belial is, you'll recognize where his shadow already walks beside you, and that realization could change everything you thought you understood about chaos, order, and freedom itself. Imagine for a moment that chaos itself had a throne, and on that throne sat a figure who refused every law ever written, every chain ever forged, every order ever whispered by the divine. This is where Belial emerges, not merely as a Belial demon, but as the living essence of rebellion itself, the demon of lawlessness. People often think chaos means random destruction, but what if it's deeper than that? What if chaos has direction, intention, even personality? Belial, explained in this way, becomes more than just a shadow in scripture. He becomes the archetype of insubordination. Like a wildfire, he does not destroy only to destroy, he consumes to remind us that nothing is truly unbreakable. And here lies the forbidden enigma, the thought that maybe lawlessness is not the absence of power, but its hidden origin. Belial, as a fallen angel, carries this paradox into every layer of mythology. He is not content with mere violence. He embodies the refusal to recognize any master. Think of times in history when empires crumbled not because of external enemies, but because people within stopped believing in the laws that held them together. That invisible current, that corrosion from within, echoes the Belial occult meaning. In every collapse, whether Rome or Babylon, the whisper of Belial's presence lingers, lawlessness disguised as liberation. The sons of Belial, described in Apocrypha, were not cartoon villains. They were symbols of people who rejected boundaries altogether. And if you've ever seen how rebellion can sometimes feel like freedom, you've brushed against his essence, even if unknowingly. When people ask about Belial demonology, they expect a catalogue of rituals and names. But the truth is, the first ritual of Belial is not performed with candles or grimoires. It's enacted in the human heart when someone decides, "I will not be ruled." This is why his figure feels timeless. In Dead Sea Scrolls, Belial Dead Sea Scrolls passages highlight him as a cosmic adversary, a prince of darkness who rules not by love or fear, but by defiance. He is the abyss gatekeeper, holding keys that lead not outward, but inward, into the fractures of the human psyche. What's fascinating is how this story resonates even today, when people reject institutions, authority, or even morality in search of autonomy. Isn't that Belial influence today, alive and breathing in our world? But here's the catch. Chaos is seductive. Imagine a young person frustrated with societal rules, convinced that breaking them is the only path to truth. They dive into rebellion, fueled by what they think is independence, but eventually they discover they've been consumed by something larger than themselves. That's the path of rebellion Belial embodies, the thrill of tearing apart order without realizing the void waiting behind. And if you've ever known someone who burned every bridge only to find themselves alone, you've seen a shadow of the Belial corruption power. Lawlessness is not always glorious. It can be isolating, stripping away the very structures that give us meaning. And yet, the temptation remains, just as strong as ever. In hidden cults of history, Belial appears as more than myth. He is invoked as a force to unshackle the mind from imposed systems. Ancient sects whispered his name not because they loved chaos, but because they believed in the forbidden gnosis of freedom at any cost. The paradox? Such freedom often becomes another prison. A person who refuses all rules also refuses connection, trust, and even love. Belial esoteric truth teaches that liberation without foundation is like building a house on sand. It collapses with the first storm. And in our modern times, this is reflected when movements born from rebellion implode, leaving only fragments of what once promised salvation. Think of Belial not only as a character in old texts, but as a living symbol, what psychologists today might call a chaos archetype. He doesn't just appear in books, he appears in your co-worker who refuses to play by any rules, in that politician who thrives on dismantling institutions, or in the artist who deliberately destroys conventions to shock the world. These are echoes of the same archetype, playing out again and again. The Belial forbidden gnosis tells us that such figures are not coincidences. They are manifestations of an energy older than civilization itself. And here's the unsettling part. This energy doesn't just exist out there, it can take root inside you. So, when you hear Belial described as the Prince of Darkness or the Abyss Gatekeeper, realize it's not about distant demons haunting caves. It's about a current that flows through society, through people, and even through you. Belial elite's worship was not necessarily about statues and blood. It was about tapping into the raw energy of rebellion, bending it for power. And isn't it strange how every elite structure, sooner or later, seems to flirt with lawlessness behind closed doors? Maybe that's not coincidence. Maybe Belial's shadow is closer than most dare to admit. And yet, as we step deeper into this enigma, we begin to see that his story doesn't end here. It branches into ancient texts, where his roots grow even darker. The name Belial itself carries a chilling weight. In Hebrew, it means worthlessness or without master, a label that doesn't just insult, it defines a destiny. Belial, explained through this root, becomes more than a mere character. He is the embodiment of abandonment, of a being without anchor or allegiance. Imagine a society where no one respects authority, where every voice insists it's the only truth. That's the echo of Belial demon energy seeded in language itself. In scripture, his name stands as a curse, a warning, and a signpost pointing to what happens when boundaries are erased. It's not random that the texts equate him with corruption. His very name was meant to strip away meaning. In biblical references, Belial demonology often emerges through indirect descriptions. The sons of Belial, for instance, were not only rebels but living examples of how disorder multiplies. These figures embodied lawlessness, selfishness, and a refusal to yield. What fascinates scholars today is how this word Belial transitioned from describing worthless men to becoming a full-fledged demon of lawlessness. It's as if human rebellion grew into myth, and myth solidified into archetype. You see, stories are not just stories. They carry the seeds of what people fear and experience. And Belial, in his earliest mentions, already represented the collapse of divine alignment. The Apocrypha and fragments of ancient texts show Belial fallen angel imagery more clearly. He is painted as a shadow at the edge of God's order, a figure lingering where light thins and decay thrives. If you've ever read the Book of Jubilees or other apocryphal works, you'll notice that Belial is not just a metaphor, he is described as a true adversary. Belial Apocrypha writings expand his role beyond worthlessness into cosmic opposition. These texts suggest that Belial was not merely about human corruption, but about a larger war, the refusal of heaven's harmony. It's in this war that he gains his crown as Prince of Darkness. Now picture the ancient world where tribes believed every name carried power. To invoke Belial occult meaning was to invoke decay, rebellion, and dissolution. Farmers prayed to avoid droughts, priests prayed to maintain order, and yet, behind every misfortune, people whispered that Belial's shadow was near. The psychological effect was massive. Fear turned into reverence, and reverence into worship. Belial elite's worship may not have looked like golden statues, but rather a silent nod toward chaos, an acknowledgement that corruption itself had a throne. Doesn't it sound eerily familiar when compared to how power works today? Interestingly, when later Christian writings revisited these roots, Belial Dead Sea Scrolls fragments provided a much darker picture. Here, he is not just worthless, he is exalted as the adversary of the sons of light. In this battle imagery, Belial becomes the general of chaos, the abyss gatekeeper with armies of corruption. Think about it. From a simple insult in Hebrew, his name evolves into a cosmic force, proof of how ideas grow when people pour fear and fascination into them. And once a word becomes a symbol, It never dies. It haunts every generation that repeats it. If we step back, we can see Belial as more than a demon. He becomes a mirror of human history. Every empire that slid into decadence had its sons of Belial, rulers drunk with power, citizens too corrupt to resist, leaders too blind to see the rot beneath their feet. This is why Belial esoteric truth resonates. He embodies the timeless lesson that lawlessness is not merely rebellion, it is corrosion that eats societies from the inside. Like rust on iron, it begins unnoticed until the entire structure collapses. And who is left standing in the ruins? The archetype of rebellion smiling in the shadows. And yet, these ancient roots are not the end of the story. They are the soil from which something far more complex grows. Belial corruption power does not remain confined to Hebrew scriptures. It finds new life in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Apocrypha, and in whispered rituals that shaped hidden cults. As we move forward, we'll see how his presence grows, becoming not just a warning but a living adversary, a force defined as much by fear as by fascination. And that leads us deeper into the mysteries recorded by those who feared him most. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, they didn't just give historians new fragments of scripture, they unveiled a terrifying glimpse into the cosmic battlefield. In those fragile parchments, Belial explained emerges not as rumor but as a central antagonist, the Belial demon opposed to the Sons of Light. He isn't presented as a minor spirit of chaos, but as the demon of lawlessness itself, orchestrating rebellion with precision. Imagine ancient communities, secluded in the desert, convinced that their daily struggles reflected an invisible war between heaven and Belial fallen angel armies. It wasn't just metaphor, it was lived reality. For them, to resist corruption was to fight Belial directly, step by step, breath by breath. The Dead Sea Scrolls paint Belial as a prince of darkness, a commander leading those called the Sons of Belial. These weren't just mythical troops, they symbolized everyone who rejected the divine covenant. In contrast stood the Sons of Light, believers devoted to order, purity, and cosmic harmony. Belial demonology in these texts becomes vivid. It shows a world split down the middle, where every act of injustice, every betrayal, every sin strengthened his dominion. And isn't that striking? Even now, we feel that same polarization in society, as if unseen hands still push humanity into camps of order and rebellion, of light and shadow. In apocryphal texts, Belial Apocrypha expands this theme with unsettling depth. He is described as more than evil. He is the abyss gatekeeper, a figure channeling forces that threaten to dissolve existence itself. Unlike Satan, whose narrative is more widely known, Belial occupies a subtler, almost hidden role. Not the tempter, but the corrupter. The Belial occult meaning here is profound. He is the quiet decay that infiltrates institutions, hearts and communities until collapse feels inevitable. Think of scandals that rock religious or political orders. These events echo the archetype described thousands of years ago. Belial influence today may not wear robes or wings, but it whispers in every system that cracks under corruption. What makes these texts powerful is their symbolic clarity. They don't just accuse Belial of destruction, they portray him as the spirit of insurrection itself. For the writers of the scrolls, Belial forbidden gnosis was the knowledge that rebellion cannot be killed, only restrained. The sons of Belial represented those enslaved by this current, willingly or unknowingly. Imagine an ancient farmer watching injustice among priests, concluding, "This is Belial at work." That simplicity gave communities a language to name the invisible, and once named, the enemy became tangible, even if untouchable. Doesn't that mirror how we still use symbols today to make sense of chaos? It's fascinating that Belial esoteric truth emerges not from mainstream scripture, but from fragments hidden for centuries. These were texts outsiders considered too dangerous or too strange to preserve in the open. Why? Because they described a cosmic dualism too sharp, too black and white, to fit neatly into orthodox religion. Belial Dead Sea Scrolls depictions show a universe where every breath is a choice, align with the divine or with the sons of Belial. And isn't it unsettling to think that many believers lived every moment under that pressure, constantly checking their lives against the specter of corruption? The Apocrypha also reveal that Belial was not just seen as an enemy of God, but as a ruler in his own right. Belial, Prince of Darkness, is not a metaphor here. It is a title of dominion. These writings show him enthroned over shadows, commanding not only demons but also corrupted men, the elites worship who bent their lives to the chaos archetype. Hidden cults believed that invoking Belial corruption power could grant influence, wealth, or liberation from moral boundaries. Yet those same texts warn that such deals never end well. The Belial path of rebellion promises freedom, but often delivers chains unseen until too late. And so, when scholars today read those ancient scrolls, they don't just see history, they see a mirror. Belial forbidden gnosis continues to ask questions we haven't answered. Why does humanity always divide between order and rebellion? Why do hidden cults keep reappearing in every era, whispering the same names under different masks? These scrolls do not close the mystery, they open it. And just as their fragile parchment survived centuries buried in caves, the enigma of Belial survives buried in us. From here, the archetype of lawlessness spreads beyond Jewish and Christian thought, appearing in myths across the world, as if humanity itself cannot escape this shadow. When we move beyond the Hebrew scriptures, we notice something almost eerie. The figure of Belial demon is not an isolated invention. Across cultures, the archetype of rebellion, the demon of lawlessness, reappears under countless names. In Mesopotamia, there were spirits who defied the gods, sowing chaos among humans. In Greece, figures like Eris embodied discord, tearing apart unity. Belial, explained through these parallels, becomes universal. Lawlessness is not just a Hebrew curse, it is a timeless force. Every society has known the shadow that whispers, "No rule applies to me," and every time chaos follows, proving that Belial fallen angel energy is less about one demon, more about a cosmic pattern. In Egyptian traditions, similar currents appear. The serpent Apophis, enemy of the sun god Ra, mirrors Belial demonology, an embodiment of disorder, a refusal to allow the cycle of light to prevail. Meanwhile, in Hindu cosmology, asuras often represent rebellion against divine order, echoes of Belial occult, meaning reshaped in another tongue. Isn't it striking that even in lands thousands of miles apart, humans kept imagining the same archetype? It suggests that lawlessness is more than history, it's embedded in human psychology. Belial chaos archetype doesn't belong to one religion, it belongs to the collective unconscious, surfacing wherever authority and rebellion collide. In Norse myths, Loki serves as another example. He is not pure evil, but he embodies disruption, trickery, and the dismantling of order. Just like the sons of Belial, Loki's children and schemes bring ruin upon gods and men alike. Belial Dead Sea Scrolls show him leading the forces of darkness, while in the Norse Edda, Loki engineers the fall of Asgard. Different names, same archetype. And this is what makes Belial Apocrypha so valuable. It anchors the rebellion archetype in texts that resonate far beyond one culture. These parallels remind us that chaos wears many masks, but its essence is always the same. Even in indigenous traditions, echoes remain. Some Native American myths speak of trickster spirits who thrive by bending or breaking rules, laughing at the idea of order. While not always destructive, they destabilize balance, much like Belial, Prince of Darkness, does in his domains. The Belial esoteric truth is that chaos never disappears, it only changes form. Whether a trickster, a demon, or a fallen angel, the energy of defiance lingers. It touches not just nations but individuals. Haven't you noticed how every child tests boundaries? That same spirit scales upward into civilizations. Rebellion begins small, but left unchecked. It can shake entire worlds. Consider medieval Europe. Even as the church proclaimed Satan as the ultimate enemy, whispers of Belial hidden cults persisted. Unlike Satan, Belial was not always portrayed as a deceiver, but as the corrupter of structures themselves. Belial corruption power wasn't about tempting with sin, but about dismantling the very laws that held communities together. Compare this with Asian traditions where rebellious spirits haunt mountains, tempting monks to abandon their vows. These stories echo the Belial path of rebellion in a different cultural tongue, yet the result remains identical. Disorder erodes discipline, and without discipline, collapse looms. Modern psychology might call this the shadow archetype. the unacknowledged part of ourselves that refuses to obey. Belial forbidden gnosis frames this rebellion as more than disobedience. It is a test of balance. Too much law creates tyranny, but too little breeds ruin. This paradox explains why Belial elites worship surfaces throughout history. Power-hungry rulers sometimes admire the energy of rebellion, bending it to break their rivals while pretending to uphold order. Haven't we seen leaders play both sides of the coin, speaking of stability while secretly fueling chaos? That's Belial influence today, alive in politics, media, and institutions. And so, Belial emerges not just as a demon in Hebrew texts, but as a mirror reflecting humanity's universal battle. His archetype shows that wherever humans build order, a counterforce rises to test it. That's why he remains the abyss gatekeeper, not bound to one culture, but guarding the threshold where order collapses and chaos seeps in. Across myths, across ages, his shadow persists, challenging every seeker to see beyond masks. And as we turn from these global reflections back to the occult lens, the symbolism of rebellion sharpens, leading us into the technical heart of what Belial truly represents. Belial demon is not only a figure of mythology, he is also a symbol loaded with metaphysical meaning. In occult traditions, the demon of lawlessness is understood as the raw energy that breaks cosmic laws, dissolving the boundaries that keep reality coherent. Belial, explained in this symbolic sense, is less a monster and more a current of energy, a force that rebels against limitation itself. Imagine gravity suddenly refusing to hold, or time unraveling from its linear path. That's how mystics describe Belial's fallen angel essence, not merely the destroyer, but the one who interrupts the order of existence, and if order sustains life, then rebellion at this level carries both terror and fascination. Philosophers in esoteric circles often compare Belial demonology with the principle of anarchy. Not anarchy in the street protest sense, but cosmic anarchy, the refusal of the universe to obey its own structure. Belial occult meaning reflects this in the idea that he dissolves forms so they can be rebuilt, or not. Just as fire destroys but also purifies, Belial chaos archetype can annihilate illusions to reveal deeper truths. But here lies the danger. When does purification end and corruption begin? To follow the path of rebellion requires discernment. Otherwise, the seeker risks being consumed by the very forces they sought to master. Think about the archetype of the abyss gatekeeper. Belial Dead Sea Scrolls depict him as such because he guards thresholds where order disintegrates. Symbolically, crossing his domain means confronting the dissolution of all you know, your beliefs, your identity, even your sense of time. Many initiates in occult history sought this path, believing Belial forbidden gnosis would grant them power. And some did return changed, speaking of visions where reality melted into fractals and new worlds opened, but many never returned whole. It's like playing with fire. You may discover warmth and light, or you may burn everything you are. Examples of this symbolism appear even in art and literature. When a poet rejects traditional structures to create a new form, that act mirrors Belial esoteric truth, rebellion as a path to innovation. When a scientist challenges accepted paradigms, daring to propose theories that shatter consensus, they walk the Belial path of rebellion in their own field. Yet, both artist and scientist risk isolation, ridicule, or ruin, echoes of Belial corruption power. This shows that rebellion is not confined to rituals or cults. It lives wherever human beings dare to challenge what is untouchable. And just like the sons of Belial, they stand as outcasts, feared and admired at once. But there's another layer. Belial hidden cults historically interpreted his energy not just as chaos, but as raw creative potential. They saw him as the Prince of Darkness who breaks forms, so new forms can emerge. For them, Belial elites' worship wasn't about kneeling to a demon, but about harnessing the current of collapse to birth something new. It's a risky philosophy, because collapse doesn't guarantee rebirth. It can leave only ashes. Yet it's tempting. Isn't that the same lure of revolutions, where old regimes fall in hope of better ones, though often replaced by something worse? This cycle echoes Belial's technical symbolism perfectly. On a personal level, this can be seen whenever someone decides to completely dismantle their life to start over. Maybe they quit their job, leave their family, burn every connection. At first, it feels like liberation, The Belial influence today alive in the human heart, but without direction, this path can lead to despair, much like the abyss itself. Belial forbidden gnosis teaches that destruction without vision is not transformation, it is collapse. To rebel with purpose is one thing. To rebel without it is to become lost in endless fragmentation, and that is where Belial's symbolism grows dangerous. So when occult philosophy calls Belial the abyss gatekeeper, it means more than scary imagery. It is a recognition that rebellion is a threshold. It can either free or annihilate. His symbolism is technical, because it forces the seeker to understand the mechanics of destruction, not just its aesthetics. Belial, explained in obsessive detail, reveals that the path of rebellion is not for the careless. It demands awareness, strength, and humility. And as we turn this lens toward the dangers of his path, we begin to see why ancient warnings always framed Belial not as a liberator, but as a devourer waiting behind the promise of freedom. The teachings surrounding Belial demon often come wrapped in allure, promises of power, independence, and liberation from imposed rules. But behind the mask lies a deeper truth. The demon of lawlessness does not give without taking. Belial, explained in esoteric traditions, is clear. His path leads to fragmentation of the soul. To walk with Belial fallen angel energy is to risk losing the very axis that holds your being together. It's like removing the center pole of a tent. At first, it seems like nothing collapses, but soon everything folds in on itself. This is why ancient texts spoke with both fascination and dread when they described his presence. Belial demonology warns that rebellion without anchor can easily become enslavement to chaos. It starts subtly. A person thinks they are freeing themselves by rejecting every rule, but slowly, they lose their compass. They no longer know where freedom ends and corruption begins. The Belial occult meaning reflects this paradox. To embrace absolute rebellion is to dissolve the self. Think of someone who spends their life rejecting every relationship, every opportunity, every discipline. What remains of them in the end? They are free, yes, but also utterly alone, consumed by the Belial chaos archetype. Freedom turns hollow when it carries no purpose. In Dead Sea Scrolls imagery, Belial Dead Sea Scrolls descriptions portray him as the abyss gatekeeper for a reason. Entering his domain means entering a realm where nothing holds steady, not truth, not love, not even identity. Belial forbidden gnosis tempts seekers with the idea that in breaking all laws, they will find the ultimate truth, and some do glimpse visions beyond ordinary consciousness. But the price is high. Many never return whole. It's the danger of playing with rebellion as a spiritual drug. Like a flame, it can illuminate or it can consume everything it touches, leaving only ashes. Belial esoteric truth is that power always comes with a cost. Hidden cults knew this, yet they still invoked him. Belial hidden cults believed that his corruption power could shatter limitations, but they underestimated the weight of living without boundaries. Imagine a society where no laws exist. At first, it feels like freedom, but soon, violence, mistrust, and fear dominate. That's the Belial path of rebellion, seductive at the beginning, but devastating in the long run. Even today, when movements chase absolute liberation without structure, we can see echoes of Belial influence today. It's a reminder that chaos without center is not progress, it's collapse. Let's take a practical analogy. Picture someone who decides to abandon every responsibility, job, family, commitments, believing that ultimate freedom will make them whole. For a short while, they feel powerful, liberated from constraints, but soon they drift, without anchor or community, spiraling into isolation. This is Belial corruption power manifesting in daily life. The lesson is not to avoid freedom, but to recognize that freedom without purpose destroys rather than builds. True independence is not the rejection of all laws, but the conscious choice of which laws to live by. And that's the subtle wisdom many seekers miss. What makes Belial Prince of Darkness so dangerous is not only his opposition to order, but his ability to cloak destruction as liberation. Belial elites worship this current because they see in it a tool to dismantle institutions, but they rarely admit that the same force devours them too. Rebellion consumes indiscriminately. It doesn't protect those who invoke it. This is why ancient apocrypha labeled Belial apocrypha teachings as warnings. His path might open doors, but those doors rarely close. Once a soul steps into fragmentation, it is far harder to piece it back together. The abyss gatekeeper never returns what he takes. And yet, the temptation remains. The Belial forbidden gnosis is whispered across centuries because humans crave freedom, even when it risks annihilation. To resist this temptation requires awareness, knowing that rebellion must be balanced by wisdom, that destruction without renewal is not progress, but loss. Belial, explained with obsessive detail, shows us that his path is both a mirror and a trap, one that lures with the promise of power but charges the price of identity itself. And as we move forward, we begin to see how his influence does not stay in myth. It bleeds into the chaos of our world today, hidden in plain sight. When people imagine Belial demon, they often picture ancient scrolls, dusty rituals, or medieval fears. But the truth is, the demon of lawlessness has never been confined to the past. His fingerprints are all over the present. Belial, explained in the language of today, is not about horns and shadows, but about systems unraveling. Institutions that once felt unshakable now tremble under scandal, corruption, and collapse. Doesn't it feel like invisible strings are being pulled, as if Belial fallen angel energy is woven into the very fabric of modern society? The same decay described in ancient texts is alive right now, hiding in plain sight. Consider the moral collapse we see across the globe. The sons of Belial, described in scripture, were people who rejected boundaries and accountability. Look around today. Doesn't it seem like greed and lawlessness dominate headlines? Leaders rise promising order, but deliver corruption. Corporations speak of ethics, while fueling exploitation. This is Belial demonology at work. Rebellion against divine or natural law, cloaked as progress. The Belial occult meaning in this context is chilling. Lawlessness has been normalized, even celebrated. And every time society accepts corruption as just how things are, Belial chaos archetype grows stronger. The Dead Sea Scrolls spoke of Belial Dead Sea Scrolls as the abyss gatekeeper, leading armies of darkness against the sons of light. In modern times, his armies are not locusts or spirits, they are ideologies, technologies, and movements that corrode trust. Social media, once a tool for connection, now spreads division and misinformation at lightning speed. Political systems fracture, communities dissolve, and truth itself seems negotiable. This is Belial forbidden gnosis manifesting in daily life, the knowledge that chaos can be weaponized to control, and those who master this weapon wield a power as old as the Apocrypha itself. Belial esoteric truth reminds us that his corruption power thrives not only in collapse, but in the illusion of control. Hidden cults may have once invoked him in secrecy, but today Belial hidden cults operate in boardrooms, governments, and think tanks. They channel the Belial path of rebellion to dismantle structures, but always under the guise of building something new. Yet look closer. How often do these new systems deliver stability? More often, they plunge us deeper into fragmentation. The elites worship this energy not out of ignorance, but because they know chaos can be engineered to maintain power. You can see Belial influence today in everyday life, too. Think of how communities struggle with rising distrust, neighbors turning against neighbors, families divided by ideology. The sons of Belial are no longer distant figures. They are people you may know, those who thrive on stirring conflict, those who celebrate destruction without purpose. The Belial corruption power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through apathy, convincing people that nothing matters, that worthlessness is the natural state of things, and once that belief takes root, rebellion is no longer dramatic. It becomes silent decay. Take a practical example: financial crises. When markets collapse because of greed, manipulation, and recklessness, isn't that the Belial Prince of Darkness showing his hand? He doesn't need to appear in flames. He appears in numbers on a screen, in banks falling, in lives destroyed. That's Belial explained in obsessive detail. His energy mutates into forms modern enough to evade suspicion, yet destructive enough to remind us of his timeless role. If ancient farmers saw droughts as Belial's work, today's citizens see crashes, corruption, and collapse with the same helpless fear. And so, Belial's role as abyss gatekeeper expands. He no longer guards dusty thresholds alone. He stands in parliaments, corporations, and digital networks. His forbidden gnosis is alive in every system where chaos is harnessed to control the masses. It leaves us with a haunting question. If Belial demon once symbolized rebellion against divine order, what does it mean that his archetype now thrives in the very institutions built to maintain order? The answer pulls us deeper, showing that Belial's influence doesn't end here. It stretches toward forces even more hidden, guarding gateways humanity barely dares to approach. Belial demon is often described as more than just a destroyer. He is a threshold, a doorway to what lies beneath creation itself. The ancients called him the abyss gatekeeper because they sensed that the demon of lawlessness was not bound to one dimension. Belial, explained in mystical traditions, shows him as a bridge between worlds, where human rebellion touches inhuman power. Imagine standing at a cliff, looking into endless darkness, and realizing there's a voice calling from within. That is Belial fallen angel energy, not only challenging order but offering access to forces that dissolve it entirely. Few dared to answer that call. In apocryphal writings, Belial Apocrypha expands his role into a terrifying kind of key. He is not a gatekeeper in the sense of guarding against entry. He is the one who tempts you to open doors that should remain shut. Belial demonology often emphasizes that once you step through such doors, you cannot return unchanged. The Belial occult meaning of this is profound. He does not create chaos out of nothing. He reveals the chaos already hiding beneath the surface, and that's what makes him so dangerous. He doesn't bring alien forces. He unveils the shadow already inside the seeker. Belial Dead Sea Scrolls references describe him as a prince of darkness, whose realm is not just war, but initiation. To encounter Belial esoteric truth is to realize that forbidden gnosis always costs something. Hidden cults sought him precisely because he opened passages to powers that defied the divine order. These were not abstract ideas. They believed Belial corruption power could unleash visions, summon entities, and break the chains of mortality. Yet, for every story of enlightenment, there are stories of madness, possession, and ruin. The abyss gatekeeper opens, but he does not close. That choice belongs to the one who enters, if they still can. Think of how this symbolism applies today. Belial influence today does not always appear in rituals. It manifests in technologies and ideologies that open doors to realms of chaos. Artificial intelligence, psychedelic exploration, quantum theories that destabilize our understanding of reality, all can be seen as modern gateways. The Belial chaos archetype reveals itself in these thresholds. Once crossed, they alter perception, sometimes liberating, sometimes shattering. Just like ancient seekers, we face questions about whether we are prepared for what lies on the other side. And if we are not, the abyss consumes more than it reveals. Belial hidden cults have always known this. From secret societies in antiquity to whispered circles of elites worship, they viewed him not as a devil to fear but as a gatekeeper to consult. Belial, Prince of Darkness, was the patron of those who wanted access to forbidden forces, whether to control others, to manipulate events, or to dissolve spiritual chains. And while history paints them as villains, we must admit, their allure came from results. People turned to Belial forbidden gnosis because it worked, but as every text warns, what is gained through him often erodes the one who gains it. The price of entry is the soul itself. On a personal level, this archetype mirrors what happens when individuals open themselves to destructive habits. Addiction, for example, is a modern gate Belial explained could symbolize. At first, it feels like a key to relief, freedom, or pleasure, but soon, the person realizes they've stepped into a room with no exit. The abyss gatekeeper doesn't lock the door, you do, by stepping through without caution. This everyday reflection of Belial's path shows why his symbolism remains so relevant. It isn't only about demons in old texts, it's about the thresholds we cross in our own lives. And so, Belial as a gatekeeper is not merely a myth, but a warning wrapped in metaphor. He reminds us that not all doors should be opened, and not all freedom is liberation. The Belial path of rebellion offers temptation, but also dissolution. The forbidden gnosis he embodies is always double-edged. What frees you may also destroy you. And as we prepare to move into the initiatic confrontation with Belial, the question becomes more personal. If the abyss reflects your own chaos back at you, are you ready to face what you see? In every initiatic path, there comes a moment when the seeker must face not an external enemy, but the reflection of their own inner abyss. Belial demon embodies this trial. As the demon of lawlessness, he represents the chaos within, the voices that whisper rebellion, the shadows that resist structure. Belial, explained in mystical teachings, is not about meeting a horned figure in the dark, but about confronting the part of yourself that refuses order. This is why Belial fallen angel energy is so feared. He does not come to you, he rises from you. Facing him is to face the fragmented self you've tried to ignore. In ritual accounts, Belial demonology describes initiates encountering visions of disintegration, identities melting, values collapsing, memories scattering like sand. This is Belial occult, meaning in action, lawlessness as a mirror, not a mask. The Abyss Gatekeeper reveals what lies behind the illusions of stability. For some, this confrontation shatters them completely, leaving nothing but despair. For others, it becomes the first step to transformation. The difference lies in how the seeker responds. Do they run from the chaos, or do they stand firm within it, learning its rhythm without being consumed? That choice defines initiation itself. Belial Dead Sea Scrolls depictions show him as the commander of darkness, yet initiates understood this darkness as inner territory. Belial forbidden gnosis was never about worshipping rebellion for its own sake. It was about surviving the storm of rebellion inside one's own soul. To enter a ritual with Belial esoteric truth was to risk annihilation, but also to grasp clarity that few ever attain. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that doesn't reflect your face, but every lie you've told, every weakness you've hidden, every betrayal you've committed. That's what it means to confront Belial Apocrypha teachings. The sons of Belial symbolize those who failed this confrontation. They gave in, surrendering identity to chaos, becoming instruments of Belial corruption power rather than masters of it. But those who endured became something else entirely. They carried the knowledge that rebellion and order are two halves of the same coin. The Belial path of rebellion then becomes not about destroying laws, but about understanding which laws are illusions. Think of a person who finally breaks free from toxic patterns, not by rejecting all structure, but by choosing a new one. That is the initiatic lesson hidden in Belial demonology. Practical parallels exist even today. Someone confronting addiction, trauma, or destructive habits undergoes a similar battle. The Belial influence today can be seen in the chaos of modern life, but initiation means refusing to collapse under it. Belial, explained through this lens, is the challenge of rebuilding after everything falls apart. Have you ever known someone who hit rock bottom only to rise stronger than ever? That's the archetype of the Abyss Gatekeeper. They walked into the void and came back with light. Not everyone survives that journey, but those who do are transformed forever. Yet, the confrontation is not just personal, it is cosmic. Hidden cults knew that invoking Belial, Prince of Darkness, was not simply about summoning power, but about inviting the ultimate test. Belial hidden cults believed that by facing him, they could claim forbidden gnosis, knowledge unshackled from divine order. But history shows the danger. Many sought enlightenment, but instead, their communities collapsed into corruption, proving that Belial elites' worship always carried a curse. The Abyss Gatekeeper demands payment, and the price is never negotiable. Freedom gained through him may taste sweet, but it often turns bitter. And so, the initiatic confrontation with Belial is more than myth. It is a timeless challenge. Each seeker must decide whether to resist or embrace the chaos, whether to be destroyed or transformed by it. Belial esoteric truth whispers that rebellion is not evil in itself. It is a force that must be mastered. But mastery requires courage, discipline, and vision. Without these, the abyss will devour. And as we turn to the final reflection, we see that Belial is not just the enemy of order, but the paradox of lawlessness itself, a paradox that forces every seeker to question the very ground beneath their feet. Belial demon is more than a villain in forgotten scriptures. He is the paradox we all carry. As the demon of lawlessness, he challenges the very foundations of order, yet reminds us that no law is eternal. Belial, explained in this closing reflection, is not about condemning rebellion, but about recognizing its necessity and its danger. Every society builds structures, and every structure eventually decays. Belial fallen angel symbolism reminds us that lawlessness waits patiently for its turn, like cracks in stone that eventually bring down temples. His presence forces us to ask, what is order without the shadow that questions it? The Belial occult meaning grows clearer here. Lawlessness is both poison and medicine. Too much, and societies collapse into chaos. Too little, and they stagnate under tyranny. Belial demonology teaches through paradox. He is both corrupter and revealer, both abyss gatekeeper and mirror of freedom. The forbidden gnosis he embodies suggests that chaos is not always the enemy. It can also be the tool that breaks falsehoods, but this doesn't mean the path is safe. Belial chaos archetype shows us that rebellion can inspire revolutions of truth, or it can devour civilizations entirely. Balance is everything. In Dead Sea Scrolls and Belial Apocrypha, he is described as the Prince of Darkness, opposing the Sons of Light. Yet even there, the sons of Belial were not monsters. They were people who rejected boundaries. Doesn't that sound familiar? Belial influence today thrives wherever boundaries dissolve. Families fractured by distrust, governments paralyzed by corruption, individuals lost in fragmentation. His esoteric truth is that the battle is not out there. It is always within. Every person carries both the discipline of order and the temptation of rebellion. Belial forbidden gnosis reveals that the war between them never ends. This paradox echoes in hidden cults and elites worship as well. Belial hidden cults believed they could harness his corruption power without being consumed. History proved otherwise. The same energy that toppled empires also devoured the ones who thought they controlled it. Belial, Prince of Darkness, does not serve. He tests. He asks whether we can hold our center when everything around us collapses. Those who fail become his instruments. Those who endure carry scars, but also wisdom. The recognition that freedom without discipline is slavery to chaos. This is the paradox of lawlessness in action. Consider a simple analogy. Imagine a river. Too many dams and it stagnates, becoming lifeless. No banks at all and it floods, destroying everything. Belial explained through this lens is the flood itself, necessary to remind us that water cannot be chained forever, yet terrifying when it spills beyond its limits. Belial esoteric truth forces us to face this reality. Laws are fragile, yet lawlessness without shape is ruin. It's a lesson as old as the Apocrypha and as modern as today's headlines, and perhaps that's why his myth has never died. It still feels alive. The sons of Belial remain a warning that lawlessness is not just rebellion against God, it is rebellion against ourselves. When a person rejects all structure, they reject the very tools that allow them to grow. Yet, when they confront Belial as the abyss gatekeeper, they also see a truth others miss. Order is not eternal, and every law must eventually be questioned. Belial forbidden gnosis whispers that freedom comes only through facing both extremes, but warns that most who try are broken in the attempt. The paradox is that the same path that destroys can also illuminate. And so we close with the recognition that Belial demon is not simply enemy nor ally, but a mirror of humanity's eternal struggle. The demon of lawlessness reminds us that every structure is fragile, every truth provisional, every order temporary. His path forces seekers to confront the void, not to glorify it, but to see what survives beyond collapse. Belial, explained in obsessive detail, reveals a final paradox. Chaos is both the destroyer of meaning and the gateway to deeper meaning. And as we step away from his shadow, the question lingers. What laws in your life are solid and which are already crumbling into the abyss? So now that you've walked through the shadow of Belial demon, ask yourself, where does the demon of lawlessness live in your life? Is it in the habits you can't control, the systems you no longer trust, or the silent rebellion that keeps you from moving forward? Belial, explained in obsessive detail, is not just about history. It's about your present, your choices, your hidden battles. If Belial fallen angel energy symbolizes collapse, then the real question is, will you let that collapse consume you, or will you use it as the fire to rebuild stronger? The ancients warned about the sons of Belial, but today the decision rests with you. Do you side with corruption power, or do you claim the strength to rise above it? Every viewer who reaches this point carries a piece of Belial forbidden gnosis already, the awareness that chaos is here, that it breathes in society and within us. But awareness is nothing without action. So I ask you, what lawlessness in your life needs to be confronted today? And what could change if you finally faced it head-on? The Abyss Gatekeeper is not just in scriptures. He is in every choice to resist discipline, to embrace decay, or to rise above it. Belial esoteric truth is a challenge, not a sentence. And now that you know, the path forward depends on what you choose to do with this knowledge. If this journey opened your eyes, then don't let it end here. Share your thoughts below. How do you see Belial's influence today in your own world? Let's make the comment section a space for seekers, not spectators. And of course, if you want to keep diving into the forbidden gnosis, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss the deeper truths hidden behind the myths. Because Belial isn't the only shadow we'll uncover together. There are many more waiting.